All right. So today, um, we're going to look kind of part two of working with images in HTML. The first part we want to look at is using, we looked at on Monday was the image tag, IMG. And that's been part of HTML since as long as I can remember. That might have been part HTML 1.0 specification. This is the we're going to talk about the picture tab today, and the picture tag is much newer. It's part of the HTML5 spec, and it came about because of an issue with the image tag, and that is as different size monitors come about, as people are using mobile devices more for their regular everyday web browsing versus being on a computer and stuff, we have a real issue with what are we going to show the end user as far as like an image or a tag or something like that. Which image do we want to show them? If we show them a really small file so that it doesn't take a lot of time to download over their mobile network, that's nice, but then it's really small on a desktop. If they're on a desktop and we show them a really big image, and then they go to their mobile device, they don't need to download that huge image. In fact, we can take the same web page and view it differently on different pages. That's known as responsive design. And so we said, well, why can't we just do that with images? Images by default, we can make them scale. And we talked about that with setting things like the max width. But if I can keep them from having to download a really big file, that's that much better. And so that's where the picture tag kind of comes into place. It's actually not just the picture tag. It's the picture tag with some source tags. And the source tag can be used in a couple different areas. But the source tags, when used with a picture tag, we can define different images and then give some hints to the browser to let it know which image to download. That way, we don't have the end user downloading an image that's too big and making the whole site seem slow. Because, and this is the hopefully part of this process, hopefully it's not just that one person. Hopefully there's hundreds of people on the website at a time. And if everyone's downloading a really big image and they don't need that really big image, it slows down the site. So it's slow for them because they're downloading a big file they don't need, and slow for everyone else because everyone's downloading this big file they don't need. So we can be a lot more optimized. So the source tag has a couple of required attributes, and this is how it lets it know what it's going to go with. First is what's called the source set. And that's just the URL of the image that's going to be displayed. So I might have like a picture of the company CEO or something like that, or maybe it's just a picture of the dining room or something, if we're doing a restaurant or whatever. But I'll have a couple different URLs. And then we'll define a media attribute. And that's going to accept the media queries that we normally set with a responsive CSS layout. We can define it. So we can say, hey, okay, if you have a max width of 500 pixels, download this one. Or if you have min width of this much, then download this one. And we can define which image we want them to look at. So what winds up happening is we see something like this example here, where we have, don't do that, where we have picture, and notice it doesn't have any attributes or anything. We're just saying, okay, this is where the picture is going to go, and now we need to define which one. So then we specify source. In this case, we're specifying the minimum width. And we'll say, okay, show me large flowers. If I've got a smaller minimum width, I can do this one. And I can have as many of these as I want. Now, typically, I don't want to create too many because it takes a lot of time to build them out. I got to modify all these images and resize them and make sure that they're the right, it's still the right composition so it still shows all the important parts. So that's going to take time. So I'll probably only put 2 or 3 in there. The last one is always going to be, though, this image file, just like we used before. And this does two things. This is the catch-all. If one of these doesn't work, use the small flowers in this case. Second, if we're in a browser that for some reason doesn't support HTML5, which should not be any browser at this point, all of our browsers at this point should be supporting HTML5. But if for some reason we are not supporting HTML5, what happens is the browsers, anytime they see a tag they don't recognize, they just ignore it. They go, forget that, that's not me. But they go, oh, here's an image tag. I know what to do with this. I'll display this tag. So this serves two purposes. One, it's a catch-all in case one of the other images don't work out, but it's a backup to make sure some image displays no matter what. And that's kind of the way this is viewed here and why it's doing that. So that's how we use the picture tag with the source tags. Now, source tags can be used elsewhere because we can use them like if we're on a video. So if we want to use a video or an audio file, we'll also use the source tags there for doing multimedia. Right now, we're just looking at images, and that's where that is. So, but if you did like a search for source HTML or source tag for HTML or something like that, you might see some other examples go, oh, wait a second, this isn't an image, this is an MP4 file, this is a MP3 file or a WAV file or something like that. It can be used for other things. And that was kind of a good idea because now you're not limiting how the how a tag can be used, and instead if you limit it so it said, oh, this is only used for images, then I have to create a whole nother set of tags for audio, a whole other set of tags for video, a whole other set of tags for other things. This way I get to reuse those tag names, and it's just less stuff for me to have to remember. Okay, so that's kind of what the picture tag is and how you use the source tags with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. It's pretty straightforward, which I love. I love straightforward stuff, but the biggest problem is building out all the source materials for it. All right. We talked about a figure tag earlier in the book. I don't remember if we talked about it in class or not. But what you can do is you can create a figure tag, and you can actually use that with an image. So, and why it becomes important is because your figure tag gives you the capability to work with another tag called figure caption, or technically figcaption. So the figure tag says, I'm going to surround my image with the figure. And then I can put the caption, and that way I can use a caption with my image. So I can apply CSS to it, so I can, set up my spacing and background colors and all that type of stuff if I want. But it now, and if you think about it, like if you look in a book, you see stuff all the time. Oh, figure 1-2, and it has some description about it. And it's kind of like putting the alt text right there on the screen for people to see, and that becomes really beneficial in some cases. You see it a lot of times in like news magazines or newspapers when they want to list who's in the photo. So oh, it's John Smith and it's Mary Jones and it's this person and that person and stuff. So they're listing out all those people. So you can use it for that. You can use it to give a title like, oh, this is a picture of the Mona Lisa. It's being hung in, it's viewable in the Louvre. It might have other things that you could do. So it really opens up the flexibility that gives what you're looking for. With some of the other ways what we used to have to do it, it was really cumbersome to work with, and it caused all types of issues. So I can take this as a tag that's specifically designed for that. That's what it's designed for. And then I can also use CSS with it to just add that visual appeal to make it a lot easier to work with. So for example, what I've done here, just to give you an idea, I set the background color to an off-white. FFF is like a pure white. EEE is a really, really light gray. I then specify the float, and we talked about the float when we talked about images the other day. And I said I'm going to float to my left-hand side. So I'm looking here and I move it off to my left-hand side. My text will surround it. I give a slight padding so it has a slight border around everything. And then I give a margin top and bottom, just a little bit extra, give a little bit of space, including a border to help make it stand out. That works very well. With the figure caption, I can go and give a little bit of extra padding and then also give a center alignment. Because a lot of times I'll find either a center alignment or a left alignment, which is default for captions. So how I want to go and work with it, that's kind of up to me. I get to control that. I might choose to say, you know what, as a caption, I'm going to make the text instead of being black, it's going to be like a medium to dark gray, because I don't really want to draw attention to it. Or I could say, it's a little bit smaller font. So instead of being a 16 pixel font, I'm going to be a 12 pixel font, and I can adjust things. So sometimes I adjust things so they stand out, and like, oh, there it is. Other times I adjust things so that it's more reserved, and you only view it if you want to view it, essentially. And that's a real important thing, and that's something I can do with these, and that's why I have these CSS rules. So if you look here as an example, I have a figure with an image. Excuse me. I'm using the image tag, and I just define what the caption is. So I say it's figure 1-1, person typing on a laptop. And when I look at that, here in the sample screenshot, you can see here's my picture, and you can see that slightly off gray background. You see the border around the whole figure, and then the figure caption is there on that list. Okay, so that's just a real easy way that you can go about the process of creating a little bit more visual appeal and providing more information with a web page and with images and stuff like that. And that just gives you a real simple example that you can look at. With the image selection hints, what I want to talk about, I'm sorry, before I get into the image selection hints, see if we can get all the words down in the right order. I'm just racing today. Any questions on the figure or the figure caption?
For the figure caption,
Yes.
do you have to establish the background, or is it like default, like light gray or?
So the figure caption by default is transparent.
Oh, okay.
If you want to define one, you can. I put the background on the figure, is where I put the background color. But you don't have to. By default, it is also transparent.
Oh, okay, perfect.
And that way, if you don't want to see anything, it can just be what the background of your web page is. So most things have a transparency or a background that's transparent, so you don't have to change it if you give a background color to your web page, for example.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, so for a couple of things and when you're picking your image, one of the things I want to be careful of always is how big is my image going to be. The bigger it is, the longer it takes to download. Now, sometimes having the right image is worth whatever it is that your download price, essentially. Is you need that image to go with the article that you're writing or with your story. If you think about if you were, if I remember correctly, don't you play tennis? Am I remember that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. So I thought you were one of the ones that play tennis. So if you're playing tennis, just as an example, and someone does a write-up about you winning a match, you almost expect to see a photo there of either you or you playing the match or something like that. It helps provide additional context to the image or to the article, and that image can draw a person into that article. Images are great for capturing attention. The right image is great for capturing attention. The problem is if you are there and you're playing tennis, but someone doesn't fix and resize the image and stuff like that, you've now made the whole web page really slow because they took it right out of their 20 megapixel camera. And so now the file is 8 or 9 megabytes instead of a half a megabyte. And now instead of helping to draw in and gather attention for the article about you and letting you see as you're playing a tennis match, now instead it detracts from it, and the person's less likely to read the article because they say, oh, this website's too slow, I can't stand this, I'm off, I'm going to go do something else. And so when we select image, we want to be careful. Resizing is obviously a big way to make sure that the right size image is being used. However, that is not necessarily the best way to go about processing it. So there's a few things that we want to look at when we pick the image and how we work with it. First off is we want to make sure that our image is clear and concise about what it is that it's doing. So if they were talking about your tennis match and they showed you playing tennis, that's great. It shows a direct correlation to what the image is about and the article is about. But if they say, they're talking about you playing your match and they show a picture of you getting into a car and you don't have any tennis equipment or anything like that, would that convey the same type of message as if you're playing tennis? No. It's going to be like, well, is the article about a car? Is it about, young people driving? Is it about, all these other things that it could be? None of them going back to what the actual article is. And so you got to be careful that the message of the image, essentially the message, what it's trying to say, does that match up with what is being shown and what the article is about? The good way to kind of ask this question is if a person could not read or could not read the language that the article's in. So if you give an example of myself, if you were to have an article written in German, and I'm go to look at this article, I cannot read German. Short of a couple words here and there, my German is basically non-existent. If I can't look at the image, therefore, and get an idea of what the story is about, then the image fails. If, on the other hand, I can look at the image and they say, well, what do you think this article about or this webpage is about? And I say, oh, I think it's about, and I can list 3 or 4 things, just look at the image, then the image and the message that's conveying, what it's trying to talk about, it matches the webpage, and that's what you want to see, that's what you want to use. A perfect example where I've seen stuff like that, and if you remember the image that we had from class the other day, let me go pull this up real quick, just because it's such a good example. Okay, so here's an example. A couple of people at a dining establishment getting ready to eat. Okay, and I've seen this happen. Someone goes in, they're building a website for a restaurant or they're building a website for whatever, and maybe the restaurant isn't open or maybe they can't get photos for it. So they go online and they pick out a stock photo. That's what this is. A stock photo is just, you can go to a website and find photos that other people have taken. You can purchase them or buy a license for the whole site, which is what I did. I bought a license for like $80 and I can download and use as many photos as I want. So you get an image like this, and then if you go to the actual restaurant, it turns out it's a family barbecue joint. No one dresses up to get there. There's no tablecloths or anything like that. It's wooden tables with half dozen barbecue sauces on it, and it's just it doesn't match. Or maybe it's um, a seafood place and it's not brightly lit. It's kind of dark, but they have huge hanging fish up on the wall or something like that. It doesn't accurately convey what you're supposed to be conveying. And so whether it matches the web page is one thing, whether it matches the actual physical presence of that store or restaurant or product or whatever it is, those all need to be in alignment and they all need to agree with one another. If they don't, there is confusion, and that actually, especially if you're looking to someone who's going to order something online, that will reduce the chances of someone continuing to shop there. Um, a big part of online shopping involves trust and being able to establish a sense of trust. So if I have a mismatch in what the image is saying and the text is saying, people aren't going to trust it. They're going to go someplace else, and that's something that needs to be remembered. Um, Same thing is we talked about the size of the image. Um, Generally, the physical size that's easy to fix. Also, the quality. Um, and there's some free tools out there. There's some paid tools out there that you can do this with. Um, but when you save like a JPEG file, you can save a quality. And I showed in class, you should have seen in the recording, where we took it all the way down to like quality 0, and it was a really, really small file, but that file was just super ugly. It was horrible. Um, on the flip side, we had like really high quality, and it made for a really large file, which took a long time to download. My wife is a photographer, and so I know a lot about photos and helping photos online and stuff. And she would always give me these files. She's saving like 95% or 100% quality. And I'd be like, no, let's save this down. And she's like, well, why? I says, well, and what I did is I finally took 2 photos and I saved one at like 70, 75% quality and one at like 95% quality. And I said, can you tell me which is the better one? And she had to kind of get up really close and start to look. And she goes, well, this is the better one. She could point out the reason why. And I said, that's right. It says, but you had to go and really examine it. It says, if you're not a photographer, if you're not going to get up really, really close to the screen and go, oh, okay, I see that. If you're not doing those types of things and you can't tell, then we should use the lesser quality one. And the simple reason is it's going to make the web page load faster. And page load speed is very important. And since she was a photographer, she had a lot of photos on the page. It could really affect her performance. So we went in, we resaved a bunch of images. I wrote a batch program to do it. And the page loaded much, much faster, but was still a good quality that people could look at and see and go, yeah, that's what I want to see. That's what I want to do. So consider sizing, not just the pixel dimension, but also the quality dimension, and try and figure that out. You can resize things in CSS, but try to avoid to. We already mentioned if you resize them and make them smaller, then you're downloading extra stuff you don't need. But you also want to avoid resizing for 2 other reasons. One is if you have a small image and you try to resize with CSS to make it bigger, a lot of times your file gets distorted. And if your file's distorted, it's going to cause some other issues, once again, involving trust, involving assumed quality that you can have and whatnot. The second issue is if you resize with CSS, a lot of times does not do as good a job in resizing inside the browser because the browser is not really designed for that, versus if you go into a tool like Photoshop or Paint.net or GIMP or something like that. So being able to resize it in a tool and upload a smaller file is a whole lot more beneficial. But like I said, you don't want to resize up, and you prefer not to resize in CSS because it can cause quality issues and also performance issues. It takes longer to do it. The length of time it takes to do it depends upon how big the file is to how small you're trying to make it, or vice versa. The more you resize something, the longer it takes to do it. I have a example here, and this is a true story that's actually happened to me. I ran into a web developer who was using the images straight out of like at the time I think it was a 12 megapixel digital camera, which was at that time a very high end digital camera, and he wanted the absolute best quality. The thing is, each file was between 4 and 8 megabytes in size, and he had probably a dozen of them on his page, and it absolutely trashed his performance for his site. And so I contacted him, let him know, and got it down to where it needed to be. When we did that, it took his webpage from taking several minutes to download to be able to download in under a minute. And that was, like I said, with a bunch of large images on it. So that was a huge benefit. This was back several years ago. So that was a really big deal, especially back then. Nowadays, that page would be loading in under 30 seconds, maybe less, depending upon how good your performance is on your broadband. When you pick out an image to use, the next thing I look at is what I refer to generically as a style. And the style is basically what's the story that your web page and your image in your web page is trying to convey. So a perfect example, this was done by a student of mine several years ago now. She was doing a web page for a nonprofit for mental health. And so she built this web page that was very dark and had some blues and stuff in it. And she was trying to mimic the isolation that someone who has mental health issues feels and how they feel all alone. And in the process, she took an image that was kind of a dark and gloomy image and put it out there off to the side all by itself. Well, the dark nature of the web page and the dark image really went together well. They complemented each other, so it looked like two puzzle pieces that fit. And the way that she did it, and she is beforehand, she had been a traditional artist with paints and stuff, and so she really understood the concepts behind light and dark and color and stuff. And so she took all that knowledge and just converted it into a web page, which I absolutely loved. But she did a really good job of taking that style and making it work with what the story was that she was trying to tell. If she had gone and taken a picture of some bright, colorful flowers and stuff, that style would have been very different, would not have fit with the rest of the page. And that would have caused another issue. So making sure that you do things like look at the color and the mood of people and that type of stuff really, really helps to bring everything all together. On the flip side, a couple semesters later, I had someone who they did a website for a bouncy house type of company. They rented out inflatables for kids' parties and all different types of stuff like that. and this person was also a traditional artist, and they took their stuff and they went with these really, really bright colors, and then they found images that matched those bright colors. Um, and I remember going back and looking at it, and every one of the images that she picked had like bright blue sky backgrounds, or was a background on white, or something like that. So she took those really bright colors for the web page, and then took really bright colors for the images, and merged them all together so that it looked really clean as far as what it was doing. Um, that way, it went with the idea of having fun and excitement and all this type of stuff with a children's theme, bounce house, whether it was a princess castle or a sports theme, that the ones that have like little basketball hoops that you can jump and dunk with, and all that type of stuff. It took all that fun and excitement and stuff and just kind of amped it up by using the right colors and those images to complement those bright colors in the web page, to make sure that everything was still talked about, um, and went together. And that's when we talk about style. That's the type of thing we talk about. Making sure the story of the image matches the story of the web page, and is fun and happy if it's fun and happy, or if it's dark and dreary, or if it's really serious. Um, you know, Typically, like if you're doing a law firm, you're not going to see a law firm with clown noses and stuff like that. If you see a picture, and whether it's like on a billboard on the side of the road, or an ad on the internet or something, lawyers always look very kind of stern and serious, and you can trust me. I don't have fun. I just I do law stuff. Um, and so, that's all going into incorporating with that style of what's working on. One thing that kills me, and this is something that my wife taught me, since she's a photographer, is always, especially if you take the photos yourself, um, is check the pictures or check what's in the background. Someone had posted some wedding photos that had been taken, and the photographer forgot to check what was on in the background. And these beautiful wedding photos taken on a beach, and behind them, and a lot of the shots, was some people off in a distance who were not part of the wedding party, um, and were definitely not planning on going and having their photo taken. I'll just put it that way. They was not a good looking group of people. Um, my wife was like, yeah, if you just turned like 5 degrees, you had never seen those people. And, they had been hidden because they were so far away. They've been hidden by the bride, or by, something else. And, she showed me some others that was just hysterical. People that have, big trash cans that are overflowing in the background, or, different things like that. So, those types of things that you want to be careful of, so it doesn't ruin your photo, for lack of a better term. Okay. When we talk about an image, I mentioned just kind of just in passing, there's different image types, and I mentioned these last week, or last class. Like I said, just kind of in passing. All of them, or almost all of them, work on the same basic principle, and that is, it's a collection of little dots that make up the image. So these little dots are known as a pixel. A pixel is short for picture element, and it's the smallest microspot of a picture. You can't break it down any further. It just has one color. If I look next to it, I probably have a similar color. Might be exactly the same, might be just kind of similar, a little bit different because of shading and stuff like that. But not necessarily. It could be entirely different. Either way, this is all about how it looks at and makes up the whole picture. There are some that are known as vector graphics, and those use some sort of mathematical formula to draw lines and curves and different things like that. if you see people talking about SVG, which is short for Scalable Vector Graphics, or something like Adobe Illustrator, those are vector images. SVG is designed to work on the web, actually. That's what it's designed for. A lot of times you can take something and export it out as an SVG. Just so you're aware. Regardless of which type you have what they known as a color depth, or sometimes what they call bit depth. And that just says how many bits are being used to display that particular color. The more bits I have, the more detailed my color can be. So if I have only 8 bits to describe the color of an image, I'm limited to 256 colors throughout my whole image. That's all I can have. If I need to have 257, I am out of luck. Generally, what will happen is I'll either get rid of one color that's kind of really close to another color and everything becomes that one color, or I'll use something called dithering, and dithering will take 2 colors and put them nearish each other to simulate a third color. So for example, if I have 1 pixel is white, 1 pixel is black, 1 pixel is white, 1 pixel is black, and I alternate back and forth, and then I kind of step back so I don't see the individual pixels, I see the whole image as a whole. It looks gray. It doesn't look black, white, black, white, black, white. It looks gray. And that's kind of what dithering does, is it might be blue, 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 red, blue, 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 red, blue, 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 red, and that gives a slight purple tint to my blue if I look back and look at the image as a whole. Now, if I get up really, really close, then I'm going to see my individual pixels. But generally, people don't get that close to your computer screen. If, on the other hand, I have a 24-bit image, then what happens is instead of having 8 bits per, or for the whole image, which only gives me 256 colors, I have 8 bits per major color. My major colors are red, green, and blue, RGB. It's where they come from. Having 8 bits for each of those 3 colors sends me from 256 colors up to approximately a little bit over 16 million colors. So it's a huge, huge difference in the number of colors that can be displayed. Now, like I said, most of us are going to use RGB. That's a standard for most screens and stuff. There are a few other what they refer to as color mixing methods. So RGB, like I said, is the most popular. It's used on all your computer screens and stuff. In print, they use CMYK. On some other things, they'll use HSB, like certain things being printed on TV. But generally, we're going to use RGB. When it comes down to picking an image for the web, you want to make sure you're using RGB. If someone says, oh, I have this image for you, and they use a CMYK file, historically, your web browser could not understand that color breakdown. What would happen is it just would leave a blank spot where that image was supposed to be. If it didn't know how big it was supposed to be, it would collapse that whole space. And that obviously has some issues. You usually saw that from someone who was like a print graphics person because they did CMYK, because that's how printers print stuff. It's a different type of color mixing process. And sometimes they give you a file that you can't use, like a TIFF file or not PNG, a BMP file or a Targa file. So anytime I get a file like that, I always bring it into Photoshop. Photoshop will open almost all the files, and then you can convert it to an image that your web browser will understand. GIMP, Paint.net, they'll also open a wide variety of files and let you change the color modes and change the file format so that it's easily accessible and read by your web browser. So that's something you do need to check. It does not happen very often, but when it does, it's a huge embarrassment. You don't want that. So definitely go in and check that. Now, by far, one of the most common file formats you're going to find out there, and it's used both in print and graphic and web graphics, is your JPEG. Um, so your JPEG has smaller file sizes. It's good for photography type of work. It works on a lossy compression though, which basically means that the file is going to be adjusted, tweaked, whatever you want to call it, to make it fit its algorithm for shrinking it down. The lower the quality, the more shrinkage you're going to get, the more what they refer to as banding that you're going to get, where you see little lines and marks as colors change. You don't want that. It's not good if you have a solid color next to a different solid color. So if I have like text and I'm putting text, black text on a white background, Photoshop has, or JPGs have a lot of problems with that. I want to use something that is not a lossy compression. So in a case like that, I'm going to look at something like either GIF or maybe PNG to save my file. Okay. So just a couple of quick things about JPEG. I got it there in kind of a nutshell. You have about 16.7 million colors you can use. So it works really great and it's good for your file compression size, as long as you're willing to work with the lossy compression. Being that it is a lossy compression, you don't want to like open a file, make some changes, save it, close it, come back a couple days later, oh, I got to open this up again, make some more changes, save it. So every time you save it, it's kind of like taking a photocopy of a photocopy. The photocopy of the photocopy might be okay, and the next photocopy might be okay, but pretty soon you're going to see some changes, and it's not going to be as easy to read, and it's going to cause you issues. That's your big issue with your JPEG file. You have your GIF file. Some people pronounce it GIF, some people pronounce it GIF. Technically, it is supposed to be sound like a J or a soft G, GIF instead of GIF. The hard G, the G sound, which would make sense because the G stands for graphics. However, the person who created it came out and said it should be GIF, not GIF. So take that for what it's worth. Its biggest issue was the fact that it limited you to only 256 colors max. You could actually go less than that. You could tell it to save it as less and make your file sizes smaller. So if you had an image that only used like two colors, GIF was great for it. You could literally say, hey, pick two colors and go for it. And it would give you like the smallest file possible, which was great. But if it dithered or if it worked really good with colors that were right next to it being the same, if every other line was different, it was horrible. Actually, in my master's program, wrote a paper on different file formats and why some were better used for others. And GIF was a perfect example where, like, if I had stripes that were horizontal, it worked great. If I turned it 90 degrees and made it vertical stripes, the file size just jumped horrendously. But if I do have those solid colors that are next to each other linearly, it works well. So things like graphs, charts, cartoon type images, stuff like that, works great for. PNG was designed to kind of be like the best of both worlds. It kind of became the worst of both worlds. So it was a lossless file compression, just like GIF. And and it supported 16.7 million colors, just like JPEG, but it could not save them in a small enough file format. So an image that might be 50K for JPEG, for example, that would be like 300 or 400K for a PNG a lot of times. That's just, it's not worth it. But PNG does have some really nice features, like it can actually do 32 bits of information. So 16.7 million colors for 24 bits of information, then 256 levels of transparency. So you can blend something in if you want to, as an example, just to kind of help make it look a little bit nicer. The SVG, that's the one I was telling you about, that was a scalable vector graphics. And that was the one that's using mathematical formulas. So instead of having this matrix of pixels, it uses calculations, it uses keywords to say shape or draw me a Benzier curve, and here's my points and stuff like this. All that type of stuff. The nice thing is with an SVG file, if you remember correctly, we use different images for the picture and the source tag. This gets rid of that because it will automatically scale up and down. It does a really good job of it as long as it's not too complex. If it gets really complex, it has a hard time running all that math and your computer just wants to come to a crashing halt. So that becomes a real issue if you had a big file. I saw someone once, they said, oh, I'm going to make this, and they took a photo and converted it into SVG. And it did not scale well. It broke down all the little sections, but it actually wound up scaling worse than a lot of images I've seen scaled. So it's not a perfect solution. You've got to know kind of where and when to use it. One of the biggest issues is that there weren't a lot of editors for working with SVG originally. Now they're starting to get some, which is really good. So those are your four major image types that you're going to find on that your web browser is supporting. You're going to find on the web: your JPEG, your GIF, PNG, and your SVG. So that gives you kind of everything that you need to know as far as that goes, kind of when to use them, when not to use them. Do you have any questions on that?
No, I'm good.
Awesome. Well, that is actually everything for today.